Good morning, everybody, and hello. Welcome to this month's webcast, 401k and 403b Plan Development, Negotiation, and Policy Update. Today's webcast is brought to you by 501c Agencies Trust. 501c Agencies Trust is the nation's oldest and largest unemployment program. If you are a 501c3 with more than 15 full-time employees, it would be to your benefit to contact 501c Agencies Trust and see how much money they can help you save on your unemployment insurance costs. Many of you on today's webcast are already working with 501c Agencies Trust. We thank you very much for your continuing participation in our program. I'd also like to introduce our co-sponsor this morning, Baker Tilly. Baker Tilly is a full-service accounting firm with a very strong nonprofit service center. Baker Tilly is providing our CPE credits this morning, and we would like to thank them very much for that support. Before I introduce this morning's panel, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go over, as usual. If you have any questions, you can see that there is a question box right below my photo. Please feel free to shoot us any questions and concerns. If you have any audio difficulties, want to pose a question to a speaker, post it in there, send it to us, and we'll line those things up in the back end and get them ready for later today. Also, if you take a look right above that question box, there's a play button, a stop button, and a recycle feature button, and an audio button. If for some reason you feel like the picture's cut out or is not advancing or you lose audio, if you hit that recycle button, that refresh button right next to the stop button, it usually clears up anything. Also, there's some event resources down below the question box. In there we have a copy of today's slides. You can find those in there. And then there's also some information in there from our friends at Baker Tilly if you need to know more about them. Today's session is worth HRCI and CPE credits. You will get an email following today's presentation, probably after lunch today, about how to file for the HRCI credits. The CPE credits are with Baker Tilly. We need to get them registration data, and then they need to get everything processed. So that process is going to take about a week to 10 days. So please be patient. But if anything comes up, you'll get a confirmation email from us today that you attended, and you can just reply to that. That's my email, and I'll answer any questions you might have. We do this once a month for anybody and everybody out there. If you have any ideas for a subject matter you'd like us to cover, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I will be glad to see what I can do. As a matter of fact, today's session was suggested by one of our past attendees, and I was able to get this wonderful group of people to work with me this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel very quickly. We'll start with Kim. She's with Helios HR. She's a senior HR business partner. She has nearly 20 years of experience in the HR industry and is a U.S. Navy veteran. Ben is our friend from Baker Tilly. He has nearly 20 years of experience in accounting with a heavy focus on benefit plan audits, and he's basically seen the good, bad, and the ugly of benefit plans at nonprofits. So we're glad to have Ben with us today. Paul's with Mutual of Omaha and is representing the broker class today. So that's his role. He's been serving client needs for almost a decade and has extensive experience with nonprofits as well. Aaliyah is the Executive Director of Retirement Policy for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She helps the Chamber develop and promote policy on employer-provided retirement plans. So it's wonderful to have her here. She's been with the Chamber for more than a decade. And on a side note, Aaliyah and I realized that we attended the same high school. So that's your little bit of trivia this morning. So with that, I am going to go ahead and hand it off to Kim and let her take over here. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, Max. Thank you. Well, I will tell you that 401k and 403b retirement plans are actually a passion of mine, and the reason is because I've worked them from both sides. I've worked them as a practitioner, helping employees understand what 401k and what retirement plans are. And I've also, of course, worked them from the administrative side for the company. So there are a lot of wonderful things I think we're going to be covering for you today. We're going to talk a little bit right now just about the best practices of the beginning part of kind of why we would offer a plan and a little bit about the administration of a plan. So there are lots and lots of reasons to offer a retirement plan. Primarily, organizations offer them for a variety of reasons, to include recruiting and retaining employees, and to make sure that they're taking care of their employees, so it's a good faith or a good practice from an employee's perspective. There are, of course, benefits to both the employer and the employee for plans, as I'm sure you're all aware, and there's incentives for all kinds of pieces depending upon how you design your plan and how you end up, what kind of a plan you end up with. When we're talking about recruitment and retention and plan design, it's really important to think about what is it that you really are trying to design and why are you putting it in place. So is it something that you're doing because you are passionate about it and you believe that the plan is something that you want to offer employees because you want to help them save for their longest period of unemployment, we hope, in their life? Or are you putting it in place, for different reasons? But it's important to kind of have a philosophy around the plan, and it helps then when you're trying to design it or redesign it. So with that said, you want to have a good foundation. You want to make sure that you have that plan philosophy in place. You want to set a procedure for how often you're going to review the plan. Recommendations are that the plans are reviewed quarterly. You discuss everything about the plan, including how well the administration is going, how the funds are going, and sometimes that's done at the broker level with the broker and maybe one internal person, and sometimes an entire committee comes together to do that. The recommendation would be to have a committee, to make sure that you have a committee that's established that can help to get a feel for what the employees want in the plan so that they are provided with something that will be of value to them. And as always, you'll want to ensure that your current plan is compliant. As a consultant, I can tell you, I would say at least 50% of the plans that I look at have some sort of an administrative problem, which is frightening from a financial perspective if you think about it, because there are not only financial implications involved with that, but there are also, the IRS can make some pretty stern rules around whether or not you are fiscally responsible enough to manage a plan if it's not well administered. So it's really important to ensure that the plan is not only compliant, but that it stays compliant and that we're following everything, all of the pieces that we put in place in our document as we go through. So when we're talking about evaluating the plan, some of the things you want to consider are how many employees are likely to participate and what percentage do you really want to participate? How hard do you want to push to make sure that employees are in that plan and participating? Depending upon the type of plan that you select, your employee participation level can actually impact the fees and the cost of administering the plan. Are you going to offer a match for your plan? If you are, how do you want to set that up? Safe harbor plans have some predefined rules for how we set those up. And then the 401k retirement plans and 403b plans, if you choose not to have a safe harbor plan, you can have a little bit more to say about how you want to make a match, or if you even want to make a match. There are options for discretionary matches. There are set matches where you are required to do contributions at specific periods of time into plans. So it's important for you to think about that match and about what you would like to offer your employees. In general, what we see today is roughly, what I see fairly regularly is roughly a 3% match for every 6%. So it's basically a 50% match for 6%, and that's for non-safe harbor plans. But I have seen companies do more interesting things depending upon what it is they're trying to do. If they're trying to encourage folks to come on board quickly, sometimes they'll set a shorter vesting schedule. They'll make that vesting schedule much shorter. If they're trying to retain people, sometimes they'll lengthen that vesting schedule out, or they'll increase the amount of the percentage that they're going to be contributing to help bring people on board. So there are lots of fun things that you can do in design to make the plan speak the language that you want it to speak. You definitely want to be looking at your investments and whether or not they're competitive. Not only is it the right thing to do, it's a fiscal responsibility of the plan and its administration. I have a question here. What are some examples of non-compliance in a plan? That's a great question. So what I've seen recently is usually an administrative error. So plans that are set up for, perhaps they are automatic enrollments, and the company didn't administer that either on time or correctly. Or there was I've seen recently also some input errors where maybe it was where the deferral percentage was inputted into one system but wasn't carried into a different system, and so the deferrals weren't coming out on time. And interestingly for you, it's really important to know that if a company makes the mistake, if the company makes the administrative error, the company is liable for that amount of money. And so what you can do, there are lots of options for correction. The most frequent one that we see is a self-correction, where the company inputs into the account, actually deposits into the employee's retirement account whatever wasn't inputted, and it doesn't come out of the employee's account. So, for example, if we inputted let's say the employee wanted 3% put in and we didn't put it in for 3 pay periods, we actually owe them half of that 3%, so 1.5% for each of those 3 pay periods with the gains on them. And the IRS has a calculator for you to help you make those corrections. If you find yourself in a position where you feel like you are not administering your plan properly, the best thing to do is going to be to reach out to your broker and third-party administrator and get your plan in place for how to make that correction. As you're thinking about design, you need to choose the right plan. Some of that's done for you. 403Bs have restrictions, the type of employees that can go into that. And since we're a nonprofit here, most of you likely have 403B plans, although some of you may as well have 401Ks. And then there are other plans as well. So it's important for you to understand what plan you're eligible for, and again, make sure that the plan that you do select, if you're eligible for 2 or 3 different types, is the right plan for your organization. Other things to think about, I talked just a little bit about ease of plan administration. If you're going to offer, and I'm a huge fan of automatic enrollment, automatic step increases, and what those are, automatic enrollment is just what it sounds like. It's where we say to employees, unless you tell us otherwise at X period of time, we're going to input you into the plan automatically at a predetermined amount, and those funds are going to go into the funds that we're just depositing are going to go into default funds, and then you're welcome to do with them anything that you'd like to do. But employees must have the option. They're required to have the option to make a change in that and to decline that if they choose to. But that's a plan that design that many brokers love, many employers love. The one thing I think that's super important for you to remember if you're going to put in an automatic enrollment plan is that you need to make sure that everyone who is involved with the plan understands the provisions of it and how to administer it properly. The other piece I think that's important are really to understand about your fees. So a couple of years ago, the IRS came out and said, employees don't really understand what it costs. When you ask an employee, what does it cost to be in a 401k or a 403b plan, the employees will tell you it doesn't cost anything because they're not aware of the fees that are there. So it actually was about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now. The IRS came out and said, now you need to disclose fees. Employees need to be able to understand what it's costing them to be in plans, what it's costing them to invest in specific funds. So making sure that you understand those fees as well and making sure that you have the proper distributions, the proper disclosures out so that employees are aware. Understanding transitions, if you're going to move from one type of plan to another or if you're going to make a change in your plan design, really thinking about the impact of that for not only the employee, but of course for your company, and making sure that you're able to handle that transition seamlessly. And then enrollment. For me, enrollment is huge. I really push hard for employees to be enrolled in the plan, as I mentioned before. A couple of reasons, obviously, for the company's perspective. It's certainly the right thing to do if you have the plan to make sure that employees are well educated and have a really strong opportunity to make a decision to elect the plan or to choose not to, and really helping them to understand the advantages and what challenges there may be for having a 401k or a 403b plan. Okay. Mac, did you want to do questions now or hold them to the end?
We'll just hang on to those until the end. I did fail to run a little poll before we got started. So if Kim, if you're done, I'll go ahead and run that now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and run this quick survey to see what kind of plans our audience members have at their organizations. And then we'll bring you the results real quick before we get Ben going. Everybody could just answer that really quick. And I will. The results coming in here. 30 seconds. All right, we got some results to send. All righty, Ben, as you hop on there and you see the results coming in from our early poll, you'll see that a lot of our audiences has a 401(b)s with and without matches.
Okay, thanks, Mac. Yeah, that was kind of my expectation. We do see some 401k plans in the non-for-profit sector, but definitely 403bs for lots of reasons that used to be. You didn't have as many compliance requirements out there, but that has been changing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes a good plan, some things to consider as your organization evolves, how to evolve your plan with it, and go through some of the common operational errors that we run into as auditors when we're performing audits of plans. So what makes up a good plan? I'm going to piggyback off a lot of what Kim said here. Main purpose of having a plan is to assist your employees in saving for retirement, but it's also a recruitment effort. You want to design a plan that achieves both the needs of you as an organization and of your employees. So something that is going to attract talent and employees to your organization, but also you don't want it to be so heavily skewed towards benefiting employees that you can't administer it very effectively. So it's good to keep in mind the balance there of, depending on the level of staff that you have, how many people you have involved, people can get tripped up by adding complex features into their plan that then they may not even necessarily be aware of. It may be something buried in there that triggers as you go. So the other thing is, a good plan is operated where the participant's best interests are at the forefront. So what I mean by that is not contradict what I just said. You want to design the plan in a way that best fits your needs, but once that plan is set up and going, as the fiduciary of that plan, you have to have the best interests of the participant at the forefront. And then, as Kim kind of mentioned about reasonable cost and investment options, you don't want to design your plan or build in so many different levels of investments to give your participants a lot of options, and then again have that run into problems. Some things I don't see it much in the 403b space where we have overly complex investment lineups. But if you do have a 401k plan, you tend to run in a little more options and flexibility in what you can provide as an investment option there, and I've seen plans get tripped up as a result. So plan evolution, I've noted here that it's a source of operational errors. As organizations grow, the processes change, the way things are handled, and that can often lead to operational errors. So it's important to make sure that as your company or your organization grows, that you're keeping in mind, how does maybe this impact the plan? And so some examples there, if you have turnover in your HR or your payroll department, that we've seen a lot there when that causes operational errors to occur. Or if you're growing, if you add a subsidiary to your organization, and I've seen it where you might think, oh, okay, these employees, they can participate in this plan too, but if the plan document is written in such a way that only the one entity is a sponsoring and eligible employer in that plan, then the other subsidiary employees may not be eligible to participate unless that entity adopts the plan as well. So something to keep in mind there. And then the other thing is we run into a lot where so much of plan operations are outsourced to your providers that it's easy just to fall back and default and say that's their responsibility. But as the fiduciary and as the plan sponsor, ultimately you're responsible for everything that goes on with that plan. So if an error occurs at the third-party administrator, you can, of course, take it up with them and lean on them to correct it, but ultimately you're responsible to the participants for anything that occurs. So that's just something to always keep in mind if you decide to outsource something that maybe you used to do internally, whether that's managing loans or approving distributions out of the plan. So take a minute here to talk about some of the common errors that we run into a lot. And Kim mentioned a bunch of these. So, eligibility errors is one thing. If you, something that we see, you may, as your organization grows, you might, let's say you decide this summer you're going to hire some interns. And you think, oh, they're only going to be with us for a few months. They're paid hourly. We're not going to get into the 401k or 403b plan with them. But your plan document might be written in such a way that they're actually eligible employees under the plan. They may not be eligible for the match or something like that, but under the deferral, especially with 403b plans, universal availability provisions, that they may be able to defer their pay into the plan, whether or not they want to or not. You have to give that option to them. And so you can, if you get to it and you didn't give them the option and they're gone and an audit comes in and finds that these employees, these interns are supposed to be able to contribute and you don't have any evidence of them electing one way or the other, then the default is, well, they should have had the opportunity, you didn't give it to them, and you might then have to actually make a correction and put money in for them, which then they can take out. So that's something to keep in mind. Automatic enrollment provisions, Kim mentioned that. That's something that has increased in popularity in the last few years. And it's easy to kind of fall into errors there. There's been so much occurrence of errors there that the IRS last year actually released some updated regulations or guidance around error correction related to automatic enrollment there. They've eased some of the provisions for correcting that so that to encourage plans to actually adopt these automatic enrollment provisions and not be kind of hesitant to do it because of fear that somebody is not going to get enrolled that should. So that should hopefully encourage a little bit more there, but it is something to keep in mind. And then probably the most common issue that we run into as auditors is incorrect compensation. So as your entity evolves, let's say you decide to start offering bonuses to some employees. And that's a lot of times bonuses are run through a separate pay run. And your payroll provider might not actually have those bonuses, that pay set up to automatically defer on like you do your regular wages throughout the year, and so that can get missed often as one example. And with that, I'll transition over to Paul, but I think we have a poll question now, or are we going to do that after Paul's section?
No, we'll go ahead and run that now. We'd like to ask you guys about your plan fees, how well you guys think your your plan is doing when it comes to how much it's costing. So if you go ahead and answer that for us. And then once we get those results in, we will hand it over to Paul, who is, of course, responsible for everybody's fees. Right, Paul? So the results are starting to come in there. You can see 50% of our audience so far feels that they are paying too much. And, again, that's changed really quick. All of a sudden we have majority of our audience doesn't have any idea how their fees combined or compare. So that's interesting. All righty. So I think we got everybody in. So 13% think that your fees are better than most. 30% think that they're about average. 16% say they're a little high, and 40%, Paul, have no idea how their fees compare to everybody else's fees.
Yeah, really the advent of the DOL's fee disclosure in 2012 has really brought a lot of enlightenment, to the forefront, which was previously under rocks, really until required disclosure. So really a lot of good things happening on the fiduciary end and the disclosure end for plan sponsors the last couple of years.
All right, cool. Go ahead, Paul.
Great. Hey, as if running your organization's plan internally were not complex enough, as Ben and Kim just overviewed, the job of selecting, constructing, and overseeing all of your retirement plan vendors creates an entirely new job and fiduciary responsibility in and of itself. We found that many employers that we work with were not fully aware of the service model their organization had been using all this time, and specifically whether it's a bundled or unbundled model. And before we define the two major models out there, it's important to identify and define the roles and responsibilities for all the multiple players involved in the operation of a qualified plan. So here are your cast of characters. The broker advisor. Now, in today's regulatory environment, there's a tremendous difference in the legal definition between someone who's either hired as your plan's broker or advisor. And Aaliyah will get into this in her section next, but the DOL's new fiduciary rule, we could easily spend an hour breaking down these new roles and responsibilities on the advisor end. But generally speaking, your plan advisor is the face of the retirement plan for your employees, takes care of enrollment, education, and most of all, engagement. Most importantly, as well, his or her job should be quarterbacking the entire 401k team for you, making sure all of these next players do their jobs for you. First up, the TPA, third-party administrator. Their primary role includes designing your plan and adoption agreement, non-discrimination testing throughout the year, providing you with the required notices and disclosures, of which there are many to distribute to your folks, and helping you file your Form 5500. Now, one very critical misconception that your TPA is a fiduciary because of the administrator label in their name. But if you notice that they are hired as a third-party administrator, the fiduciary role still falls on the employer's very own plan administrator, named plan administrator. Up next, the record keeper. Often a thankless role, but your record keeper plays one of the most vital roles to keep your plan compliant. What these guys do, they track every penny of tax-deferred contributions, taxable distributions, loans, investment units bought, sold, gains, losses, and then accurately reporting every detail to your TPA and payroll provider. And as Ben can attest to, even a slight mistake made by your record keeper is often the immediate trigger for those DOL and IRS audits. And finally, investment house. It's probably the most straightforward of these vendors. Usually a large fund family, your Fidelities, Vanguards, or a large bank, Bank of America, BB&T, that provide investment platforms for your advisor to work with. Now, covering those players, we can now get into the two major models out there for 401ks and 403bs. Now, that's the bundled versus unbundled. Now, no absolutes as to best arrangement. Each has its own inherent trade-offs. But I'll get into the top 3 characteristics for both. Now, in a bundled model, this is prevalent for employers under 250 participants, where in that demographic, about 85% of those plans are in a bundled model. Now, all 4 parties that we discussed there are packaged, prepackaged, and integrated in a nice, tidy setup. Now, that allows for ease of administration, where the plan sponsor has one single point of contact, and for servicing as well. Provides seamless integration for technology, information flow, and most of all, an employee experience. Typically cost-effective as well, but the primary drawback to a bundled model is inflexibility with vendor selection, since it's a prepackaged deal there. Now, with unbundled models, it's primarily used by larger employers with deeper internal HR and finance infrastructure, self-managing plans for the most part. This setup allows them to really hand-select each component of their plan in a best of the best vendor environment. Usually outside consultants are hired to handle the vetting and arrangement because it is a complex structure. In exchange for being highly customizable, this model does add layers of complexity and liability in overseeing all the moving parts and players there. Now, we covered components of the plan and roles and responsibilities. Now, I'll get into a really quick overview of how to benchmark what you're getting from your vendors here, and a little rule of thumb on fees. Now, with your broker advisor, the big question we always ask is, how engaged are they? How available are they? And we ask our plan sponsors, don't look at how many times he or she is on site for employee meetings or for open enrollment, but what kind of a difference do they make in key performance indicators, such as, hey, did our deferral rates go up? Did our participation rates go up? Do I get less servicing questions brought to me by my employees because my advisor is taking on a lot of that? And most of all, do a survey. What do your employees think of their advisor? A lot of times we'll see that the advisor or the broker is hired because of a relationship with the CFO or with the CEO without much regard to if they're a good fit for the employee base. Another consideration to ask is whether they could, whether they are serving in a transactional / sales capacity or fiduciary capacity. Now, again, with the new DOL regulations, this will be a major focal point for you to consider as a plan sponsor, which role your advisor is playing for your employees. With your TPA, check your service contract. Services are pretty wide-ranging and often more limited than you think. Most TPAs won't do any more than required. I would ask, are they actively engaged throughout the year in helping you with plan compliance and administration, or do they just surface annually for the 5500 filing? Do they take on delivering all those notices and disclosures to your employees, or do they send you the PDF to handle it yourself? Probably the most critical question I'd ask your current TPA is if they can act in a fiduciary capacity, namely the ERISA 316 plan administrator. Every 403 and 401k plan out there has an assigned ERISA 316 plan fiduciary. It's typically the person who signs the 5500 or someone who's named, such as like the company principal or the head of HR. That person is responsible top down for proper administration and compliance. A lot of folks are asking their TPA if they can serve as a co-fiduciary or a named fiduciary, so then the risk management is shared. So you can, for the most part, feel comfortable if one of your vendors is serving in a co-fiduciary role because they do have a legal skin in the game. Now, to investments, I see red flags when expense ratios hover above 1% in 401ks. I mean, funds purchased in retirement plans should always be cheaper than retail. I also look at the simplicity of the menu. I mean, it's easy for employees to understand and feel comfortable with saving their money. Since the trend really has shifted towards offering low-cost index funds, and you've seen most of you guys probably have life cycle funds, target date funds out there. They've been fantastic to get folks who normally don't have any investment acumen involved and comfortable in saving in a retirement program. Big question with investments, ask how your advisor is paid, as this is a primary source of conflict of interest. Is your broker pushing proprietary funds, funds with high loads or 12B1 fees? As I mentioned, with the advent of the DOL's fee disclosure regulations from 2012, this gives you guys a lot of leverage, and seeing what you guys pay and negotiating your fees. But really, for all services, ask what value and value-added benefits are you guys getting from everyone involved with the plan, and then back up into the fees and commissions to determine, fairness on your end. But I know I mentioned fiduciary theme quite a bit in my conversation, but next up, Aaliyah will deliver probably the biggest news from the Department of Labor with their ERISA regulation in decades. So with that, here you go.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And it is a great segue as we talk about, as you mentioned, the different positions that people hold and their different responsibilities. The DOL fiduciary rule really has changed a lot of that in the financial services area. In terms of practical implications, the DOL intended to increase the number of people considered a fiduciary under ERISA, so it effectively brings a significantly larger number of financial service providers under the scope of a ERISA fiduciary. It was also intended to remove conflicts from investment advice, and the DOL considers pretty much all commission payments to be a conflict, so you'll see that the rule really favors level fee payments. Technically, the rule still allows commission payments, but there are significant burdens attached. So without getting into the intricacies of the rule, and I'm happy to take questions on that later, but I just want to give you a big picture view. As you know, ERISA is a prohibitive statute, so if you're found to be a fiduciary, you are not allowed to engage in certain transactions. And the only way you can engage in certain transactions is if the DOL specifically allows it through a prohibited transaction exemption. So with this rule, as I mentioned, it expanded the scope of the people who are considered fiduciaries. So in order to have any retirement plan transactions continue, there are several exemptions included in the rule. The main one is a best interest contract exemption. It is meant to apply to those commission payments so that people can still get commissions, but it does require a substantial number of new requirements and a number of disclosure requirements, including point-of-sale disclosures and ongoing web-based disclosures. And so with those, obviously that increases the administrative cost and compliance cost that these financial providers will have to take on. In addition, the contract created under this exemption is enforced by a private right of action, which could allow lawsuits to be brought in state courts. So as you know, under ERISA, lawsuits are brought only under federal court, so by expanding this provision to allow for lawsuits in state courts, you're significantly increasing the litigation risk associated with providing financial information. So all of this leads to the concern that there might be less access to financial education and financial advice as providers in this space look at the requirements, the cost, and the litigation risk and may decide to get out of this space because it only applies to the retirement investment products and not to retail products. So with that, where are we politically? Is this is this it for the rule? Are we done, said and done? Well, it's interesting. Today, the Senate is actually voting on a CRA, which is a resolution of disapproval, and if passed, it would basically rescind the rule. However, and it is expected to pass on a partisan basis, with Republicans voting for it and Democrats voting against it. However, the President has already stated that he will veto the resolution of disapproval. So, even though it's a statement by Congress, it's a statement that won't have impact because of the President's veto, and the Senate does not have enough support to veto-proof the resolution. Before the final rule was issued earlier this year in April, both the House and Senate introduced legislation that would have changed the rule, would have withdrawn the rule and implemented a statutory version of the fiduciary rule. There was bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats. However, after the rule was finalized, most Democrats withdrew the support for the legislation and instead supported the regulation, saying it addressed their concerns and they didn't see the need for further legislation. So from that perspective, we don't see a legislative path forward in terms of new legislation talking about fiduciary. So the final role for Congress that remains to be seen is the appropriation strategy. So as we look into going into budgets for next year, are there appropriation riders that could somehow impact this fiduciary role? It's a little difficult to see how that happens because most appropriation riders are, not most, all are supposed to be a funding mechanism that says the agency is not allowed to use funds to promulgate a rule. They can also not use funds to enforce a rule. In this case, as I mentioned, there's a private right of action that's enforced by the courts, so the non-enforcement rider doesn't do a lot of good. There is talk of looking at a rider that would delay the effective date, in which case, as we get a new administration, they might have a different view of the rule, and there might be an opportunity to make some changes there, either eliminate the rule or make some changes to make it what I would consider a little bit more business-friendly. However, that's a real long shot, so most people are in terms of looking at congressional activity, considering this is pretty much it for Congress, and without a real long shot kind of action that Congress is pretty much done with the final fiduciary rule. So that leaves one more course of action, and that's litigation. There are a number of organizations, the Chamber included, that is considering whether to litigate over this rule. As far as I know, and I speak specifically for the Chamber, but I don't know of any others, although there's consideration, there has been no decisions and no suits filed as of yet. However, we could see suits filed within the next couple of weeks on that. And the claims are still up in the air, so it ranges from the DOL has exceeded their authority, their regulatory authority, to concerns under the Administrative Procedures Act in terms of due process and not following that correctly. So again, until we actually see suits filed, it's hard to tell what claims would be. And again, litigation, as we all know, is also a chance, and so it's not clear how that would work out in the end. So I think for the most part, companies are moving forward as if this final rule is in place. So as a plan sponsor in the 401k or 403b space, how does this impact you? As I mentioned, there's increased compliance costs, there's increased administrative costs, and there's increased litigation concerns. So you could see in the next couple of years increases in costs from your financial providers. And as Paul was going through the different types of providers, particularly for your broker-dealers who might now be providing a lot of your investment education and investment advice, in order to continue to provide that if they are considered a fiduciary under ERISA, there will be an increase in their costs that could be passed on to plan sponsors. Also, as I mentioned, there might be service providers who decide it is not worth it for them to stay in the business, and so it might be harder to find financial service providers who are willing to provide services to retirement plans generally. So as I said, that the rule has been finalized, but there's still some efforts to make some changes and get some things done. So we're still waiting to see how that all shakes out. The first part of the rule is due to be implemented in April of next year, so I think that's when we'll really start to see some of the initial stages of the impact of this rule. Another issue that is on the horizon is state-sponsored retirement plans. There are a number of states that have enacted these types of plans, and what's interesting is the state sponsors the plan, but it's for private employees, and the intent is to get at the coverage gap in retirement. So for those employees whose employer does not offer a retirement plan, the state would sponsor this retirement plan that private employees could join. So the most recent state is Maryland, which has passed a law, but it follows behind California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Washington state, with about 15 other states having legislation in consideration. And the plans range from your automatic IRA to marketplace solutions, which I kind of liken to the healthcare exchanges. There's a number of options that are on a platform that have to meet certain requirements. An employer can choose one of those and then offer that to their employees. So there are a couple of issues with the state-sponsored retirement plans, and for a plan sponsor, you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with me? I offer a plan. I'm not going to have to worry about this. Well, one question is that although the laws have been passed, there's not actually a plan in place yet. They are still working out the details. And so when you ask exactly what does that mean in terms of I offer a retirement plan, am I going to be impacted by this rule? The answer is not so black and white. So most of these retirement if not all of them, state that if you offer a retirement plan, you're not subject to the law. However, when you ask the regulators who are looking to implement the plans, how do you define offering a retirement plan? Some of them have stated very clearly that it's not just whether or not you have a retirement plan, but whether or not you have all of your employees participate in the plan. So if you have employees that are excluded because of age or part-time employees or for other reasons, you would be subject to these state laws and have to offer them one of the plans required by the state law. So we feel even for employers or plan sponsors that are already offering a retirement plan, they're not completely out of the woods and could be pulled into some of these state-sponsored retirement plans. So from that perspective, it really raises an ERISA issue. ERISA was implemented so that employers would not have to comply with several different state laws, and this would completely undo that, particularly for a plan sponsor that's already dealing with ERISA and then in addition having to deal with several other state laws as well, or several state laws. The other issue from the employee perspective is portability. I live in Washington, D.C., very small metro area where people can live and work in multiple states in Maryland, Virginia, D.C., sometimes West Virginia, Philadelphia. So if you're changing jobs and your job might take you 5 miles away, but that's a different state, well, you can end up with these state-sponsored plans in several different states, and it really goes against the idea of consolidating, of being portable that we've worked on in the private retirement system. The other issue is that all of these state laws have said that these will not be ERISA plans. And I find it very interesting, given that we've just spent a significant amount of time talking about the DOL fiduciary rule and working with that the Department of Labor would now turn around, and with their main emphasis for that rule being that they want to provide greater protection for employees, that they want to make sure employees have less conflicts or are getting the best advice, they would turn around and exempt a whole section of these same employees from the ERISA rules. So it's a real policy question about whether or not that's the right thing to do. Just to follow that up, the Department of Labor earlier this year issued a proposed rule providing a guideline for state-sponsored plans to not be found to be covered by ERISA. There were a number of comments submitted. Mostly the states that submitted comments were in support of the rule, and other entities that submitted comments were opposed to the rule. The DOL is looking to finalize that rule by the end of this year, and once that happens, I think we'll start to see the implementation of a lot of these plans and start to see, again, the real impact there. The final issue I want to raise today is tax reform, which seems to be always on the horizon these days. But there are two specific issues, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, in tax reform, I don't think retirement plans are directly, or the tax incentives for retirement plans are a direct target, but there's a lot of ways that they are and can be indirectly impacted, and really that's what my main concern is, and our concern here is at the Chamber. So one is this idea of corporate integration for tax reform, or under tax reform, and it's gotten a lot of popularity recently, and the gist of it is that it's meant to tax corporate dividends, and it's supposed to create parity between corporations and private owners and LLCs, kind of all the different business forms. But the unintended consequence for retirement plans, and there's also some unintended consequences for charities, so you might be familiar with this as well, is that dividends and interest earned in plan investments while they're actually held in the plan are taxed. And then the contributions and remaining investment earnings are taxed again when the amounts are withdrawn from the plan. So one of the biggest tax incentives for 401k and 403b plans are that there's no taxation on the build-up inside the plan while you're saving. And this corporate integration would totally undo that. And from my understanding, it seems like it would almost tax it twice, as a matter of fact. So you're losing all of the tax incentive for retirement savings, and I think would have just a horribly detrimental impact on the 401k and 403b system. The other issue are the deduction limits for retirement plans. And again, there could be an effort to directly attack the deduction limits and saying, changing the amounts, etc. But I really think the greatest concern is when we talk about the caps on aggregate deductions. And the President has, in his budget, has recommended this several times to cap deductions overall at 28%. And again, it's an effort to seek parity between different income earners and households, etc., in terms of letting people decide what deductions they want to take, but capping them all at a certain percentage. Well, again, we see this as having a negative impact on retirement plans, as people might not realize that when you add your mortgage deduction and your retirement deduction and maybe your health care deduction, it might be pretty easy to get over that 28%, and then which ones of those go first, unfortunately, might be the retirement plan deduction. So with that, those are the issues I see. I think we're going to open up for discussion and questions, and I look forward to any questions that you may have. Thanks.
Well, thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate you going through the policy side of it. We do have a couple of questions in the queue. If anybody can think of anything that they want to shoot our speakers, please go ahead and shoot that over, and we'll talk about those now. First of all, I also want to know real quick, did any of the other panelists have a question about what they just heard from Aaliyah, or is it all understood by you guys as well? Did anybody have any questions? No? Cool. No. All right. All right, well, we'll just hop into the audience questions then. Paul, I wonder if you could answer this one for me. So just the very basic rudimentary differences between the 401k and 401b plans.
Oh, it's 403b, right?
Yeah, the difference between the 401k and 403, yeah.
Yeah, and Kim, please hop in anytime. I think this is more your specialty as well. Namely, some time back, 403bs were just you didn't even need an adoption agreement, right? You didn't even need a plan document to run the thing. Over the last decade, their administration and compliance has really mirrored that of its 401k counterpart. The differences do lie within eligibility. With 403Bs in nonprofits, there's a universal availability provision to where anyone who's considered eligible, let's say over 18, a citizen of the U.S., if they want to defer their own money from day one, they have to be able to do that in a 403B.
Okay. All right. Another question. Can an organization opt not to have retirement contributions taken out of bonuses? That's up for anybody.
Yeah, this is Ben. I can take that. So it comes back to what your plan says. So you can't opt not to do it. If your plan includes bonuses as compensation eligible under the plan, then the participant has to have the ability to do that. You can set aside where you have a separate election by the participant where they would have to make a different election on their bonus from their traditional pay, like if you just establish that as part of your processes. But if you don't do that, let's say, and it is included as compensation, then you would need to withhold on it.
Okay. And we also have a question. We need a basic definition of a safe harbor plan.
I could take that as well. So at the root of it, a safe harbor plan is one that is safe harbored against some of the non-discrimination requirements that plans are required to go through. So if you have a traditional 403B plan that only has deferrals, you don't have any discrimination testing to go through anyway, so it really doesn't apply to that. But if you have a match feature, then you can implement what's called a safe harbor match, and in that case, the match has to meet certain requirements. At the base, it's 3%. You have to match 100% of the first 3% and then 50% of the next 5%. And employees are immediately vested in those contributions. It can be a little bit different if you have a qualified automatic enrollment or automatic contribution provision in place, but that's probably too much minutia. We don't need to get into that. But at the base, it's that you have this fully vested match, non-discretionary match set up, and as a result, you get to avoid the ADP or ACP non-compliance testing.
Okay, and we knew that we were going to do these kind of questions about fees. We have Mary in there if you guys want to look into your question queues, talking specifically about some changes they've had, and she feels they have high fees. Some other questions in there about how they can compare their fees to the fees of other employers, trying to make sure that they're not overpaying. Can we broach that topic and try to help our audience get some competitive advantage as to just making sure that they're not paying too much?
Yeah, Mary, with terminated staff, I mean, it all comes down to employee engagement and communication for your folks. Really communicating the new plan, effectively having your advisor on site or having an open discussion internally with the benefits of going to the K program. Say, hey, you know what, you'll be able to take loans. The loan policy might be a little more liberal coming here, or if you're changing investment platforms, maybe that can be communicated, to go to a cheaper, better investment lineup, for example. But it really does come down to what changed in the adoption agreement and the plan document with provisions that will be affecting them.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything about how to get the best plan, the cost associated, or we could just ask Paul for his.
Yeah, you know what? I like using Brightscope.com. It's a free site. It's one of the better repositories out there for 5500s. They do a great job of benchmarking plans of different sizes and shapes. and then throwing in a few comparative measures there. So as a free, quick resource, I like using brightscope.com for initial due diligence.
Okay, great.
And you can also ask your advisor to do benchmarking as well.
Right, exactly. Okay, we'll take one more question as we're running out of time here, but I just want to let everybody know we do have another session at the end of next month. We're doing performance reviews, everybody's favorite annual or semi-annual event, evaluating the talent in your organization. So we'll cover that next month. So you can click there and go ahead and register. But one last question about switching plans. One of our members of our audience looks like think about switching from a 401k to another type of plan. Is there any recommendations about what that organization should do as they move that, and then what happens to the money when it's in one plan and it's moving to another plan?
Okay, yeah, I see Mary's question here with transferring from a 401k account into an IRA. You would have to check your adoption agreement to look at in-service withdrawal provisions. And obviously, if the person is 59 and a half, they can generally do a qualified a rollover into their own IRA.
Okay. All right. Well, our time is up. I appreciate everybody being on the call today, and thank you very much to Kim, Paul, Ben, and Aaliyah for taking time out of their day to help us out here. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can email me. You'll get an email from me later today, and I can forward them to the appropriate party. And I'm sure if they have the opportunity, they can help you out. But once again, thank you from 501c Agencies Trust. I appreciate everybody being on today. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mac.